I am under the impression, right, that because of that, there's more parity in the sport. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is, coach, because I'm looking at the same programs tend to be really great and really good, right? I got the unenviable task of ranking all top 25 programs each and every week at Fox Sports. And come October 12th, I'm going to be moving and shaking. Come October 19th, I'm going to be moving and shaking. I wonder with this new 12 team playoff, with how you're telling me that folks are recruiting from everywhere and they're recruiting everybody, do you think that there's more parity in the sport?
I do. I do think there is. In the middle of the pack, I do think there is. And there's also some teams that have jumped up in the top 10 because of the NIL. I mean, look at Ole Miss and Missouri. What are they doing in the top 10? They don't deserve to be in the top 10 in college football. They ain't never been in the top 10 in college football. I mean, maybe less than, count your fingers on your hand, and that's all out of respect to those guys. But they have gotten in the game because they have people that are supporting and giving money to buy players. And in moving forward, if the NCAA doesn't get a hand on this deal, this NIL is going to run people. I mean, it is going to. If you don't have the cash, you are not going to be able to get legit players. And and if you're going to try to play in the SEC, man, you better be spending a whole bunch of money because everybody else is spending a whole bunch of money. You look at the Big 12, for example. Who's going to win that conference? You got Utah beat OSU last week, and they're one of the top ones. And Kansas State, people thought was one of the top ones. They just go get demolished by BYU. Even though if you watch the game, I mean, it really didn't turn out the way it looked like it was going to turn out. So it's tougher. It really, really is. There's many more players that are coming out, RJ, that are more developed coming out of high school than there used to be. You got quarterbacks, you got receivers, you got DBs that are in 7-on-7, 6-7 months out of the year. There's some that are in 7-on-7 year round. There's kids out on the West Coast that are playing in Arizona. They're throwing the ball and catching the ball year round. So young men are coming out and they're even better. So there's just, if there used to be 20 good quarterbacks, now there's 40 kids that can go to college and play ball somewhere. You might have a quarterback. Well, look at the quarterback of James Madison last week that just lit up North Carolina. Where did he come from? Nobody was recruiting him. He threw for about 385 yards on those guys, and so I just think there's more better players that are out there that are getting developed and that are, further along. It's just trying to keep those guys on your team and trying to build those relationships and trying to have some chemistry is the biggest thing, because when you lose some guys, if you lose some guys to the NFL, like Coach Beanbo, you lose a guy to the NFL, one guy goes to the NFL that shouldn't go to the NFL. You had one guy transfer that wouldn't have transferred if there wasn't never an NIL deal. And then before you look at it, you go out and get a few transfer portal guys. And if you don't really hit on them, man, you're in a bad position. And here's what happens in the NIL the transfer portal recruiting. So during that time, you got everybody down the hallway who's in charge of recruiting and watching film. So they'll come down there and let's just say they give the offensive line coach the film. Well, they'll watch him. Oh, he's really good. I think he can play here. Okay, well, you take him to the offense coordinator. Well, he likes him. I think he can play here. Take him to the head coach. He likes him. So what do you got to do? You got to do a background check, okay? Well, you can't call that college he's at because that coach don't want to talk to you because that kid's leaving. So who do you call? They all call the same person, the high school head coach. Well, what's he going to do? Well, 90% of them are going to say he's a great kid. He's a hard worker. You can trust him. He's a leader, this and that, da-da-da, da-da-da. They're all going to tell you the same. And then you bring him on a visit the following week, and he comes in and you offer him and he commits. You've had a week-long relationship. You don't know anything about him, So, man, it's just a challenging time what they're in right now. And sometimes you hit on these transfer guys. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you give players NIL money and some of them don't deserve it, and you end up losing out on some other guys. It's a challenge right now.
I appreciate that, Coach. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, not the least of which is just how right you got to be with your evaluations, specifically at that quarterback spot, because you brought up Alonzo Barrett at James Madison. I'm thinking about Cam Ward, how he ends up at Incarnate Word because they ran
That's
one
right.
T,
That's
and
right.
then all of a
That's
sudden
right.
that dude can sling it. But if
Yeah.
you miss on one of these guys, any of them, honestly, you got a problem. Like I was reading a story by a buddy of mine, David Ubben, writes The Athletic, does great work. He had this anonymous quote that, for good reasons, said, look, are we going to pay $800,000 for a guy that's going to be a backup? Or are we going to try to put that in an impact wide receiver? We're going to put that into a defensive lineman. And then I was thinking, my daddy is going, I never have to worry about that. Once they get to campus, they're mine, like until they go to the NFL. So I'm curious, knowing that you got to get these things right and these relationships have to be developed so quickly, what are the principles that you might be using as Cale Gundy to go, okay, I trust this or I don't trust this, or I'm going to stand on the table for this? Or what is it that you specifically know about your evaluations that would lead you to go, I like this kid?
Well, I mean, there's always a few things that, for every position that, coaches are looking for. I wanted kids that were, first of all, that were great athletes. I wanted kids who loved playing football, kids that were tough, that come from good families and good backgrounds, and that you could coach them hard. There's just a few things, core things that I just believed in. And if you had those things, but you weren't a good kid off the field, I didn't want you. I don't have time for it. I got to go on down the road, so there were some things that I looked for, and I wanted to make damn sure that they that those young men had them, and then there's occasions that you're going to miss on. I mean, it happens, So the challenges are there. It's harder and harder, and But as a head coach, which I've never been a head coach, but if I was a head coach, you got to hold those guys accountable. You got to hold every single coach accountable. You better be bringing in players that can play. If you don't bring in players that cannot play, I'm going to fire you, and I'm going to go find somebody else to bring in players that can play. I mean, it's not a it's not something that it's me against you. I'm just telling you, this is a business, and the severity of making mistakes or missing on people, we just can't do that anymore.
That is my favorite quote from Mad Men, Don Draper, John Hamm. That's what the money's for, right? Is what they would tell you. It's like, hey, look, these are the stakes. And I would argue that the stakes never been higher in college football.
That's right.
Not just because of what the money is looking like, but because we're expanding the playoff. And you're finding out that a television network like ESPN is going to pay $8 billion for the rights to the college football playoff. That tells you a lot about what's at stake here. Coach, I want to throw some players at you. We hadn't talked about these before. So for the folks that don't know, but you mentioned some of these guys that are ready to play, and I've been pointing to folks going, Trevor Lawrence really pushed this to the forefront for a lot, because that dude, he replaced the guy that got them to the playoff. You know what I'm saying? Like, he didn't just replace anybody. He replaced a really great player, in my opinion, Kelly Bryant, and ends up leading them to a national championship. I say that to say, I'm looking at Ryan Williams playing wide receiver at Alabama. I'm looking at Jeremiah Smith playing wide receiver at Ohio State. And I'm asking, as a guy that, went down to Texas and brought Adrian Peterson out of his living room in Norman, do you tell that dude, hey, man, you come up here, nobody's guaranteeing you a spot, but I've seen what I need to see. Just show me what I've been seeing, and you're probably going to play right away.
Well, I told him he had an opportunity, because that's just who I am, and that's how I am. Okay. And honestly, I think that AD and his daddy Nelson will tell you that's one of the reasons why we came to school there, was because everybody else was just giving him everything. And that's not how AD was raised. That's not how Nelson raised him, and Benita, the mom, raised him. I mean, they coached him. They taught him hard love every single day. And nobody's going to give you a damn thing. You got to go out there and earn it. So we hit it off in a relationship just because from day one, that's how I was. And, I could have missed on it, but that's not what they wanted. They didn't want to hear that. Basically, this is a great opportunity for you here. I'm going to coach you every single day. I mean, 365 days a year. I ain't talking about football season. I'm talking about going to class. I'm talking about how you act in the cafeteria. I'm talking about how you walk across the street, just anything, life, man. I'm here to help you for 4 to 5 years or however many years that you're here. I'm here to coach you hard, but I'm going to love you harder. And so I had kind of developed that personality of kind of who I was, and they loved it. That's what they wanted. They didn't want the icing on the cake. That's not what they wanted. And still to this day, that's not who the Peterson family was.
I love that because you're standing on your principles, right? Which
Yeah.
number one, and then they're knowing where you are going to get moved or not be moved, right?
Yeah.
And number
Yep.
two, it's again speaking about my parents. My daddy is a retired sergeant in the Air Force. My mother's a retired captain.
Okay.
That
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 explains it.
tells you how I was raised.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
So being coached hard is just part of life.
That's right.
That said, a lot of my peers they weren't raised by retired military like me. So there are folks that absolutely want that, and then there are those folks that they want it the way they can get it.